I'll say everyone's full names. Okay. The A&P by Ellie Krauss, Reagan Rhodes, Rachel Rose, Jaden Combs, and Allie Walton. About the author, John Updike. Born in Reading, Pennsylvania, and raised in the small town of Shillington. As a teenager, he was recognized for his writing by winning the Scholastic Art in Writing Award. He received a full scholarship to Harvard and graduated with honors in 1954. He started writing editorials, poems, stories at The New Yorker before moving on to write books. His works focused on the literary realism genre. His literary contributions. He was one of the 4 people to have won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction more than once for Rabbit is Rich in 1982 and Rabbit at Rest in 1991. He published more than 20 novels. He is considered as one of the great American writers of his time. During his career, he received 18 awards for his writing. Biographical lens. Literary realism is a literary movement that represents reality by portraying everyday life and experiences. Realist writers seek to tell a story truthfully instead of romanticizing or dramatizing the story. As a realist author, Updike believed that ordinary life was worth writing about. In the A&P, the story is told by an ordinary boy working an ordinary job in an ordinary store. The story is told in a way that makes ordinary life and working relatable to readers. Updike lived in a time where World War II was ending, the Cold War was raging, the civil rights movement was prominent, and politics was a mess. Women were fighting gender norms and changing the culture for women in America. In the A&P, we see women going against dress codes and living out their lives by wearing swimsuits in public, yet they are still being ridiculed for their attire by the manager and sexualized by Sammy, the worker. Our questions for the biographical lens are, how does the author's beliefs reflect in the short story? And what social, political, or historical events are reflected in the story? The author really believes that real stories should be told and that they are not boring, which is why his main genre is realism. And social, political, or historical events reflected mostly are the gender norms of women and how they are being affected by them in this story.
The historical lens. A&P was written during a time when there was a lot of social upheaval in the United States. The United States was divorcing the era of the golden age of capitalism to enter the countercultural nationalistic era. The counterculture ideas are further seen in A&P when the 3 girls enter the shop wearing nothing but bikinis. During the 1960s, the women liberation movement fought for the equal rights of women. During the 1950s, it was an American ideal that women should live a domestic lifestyle and were ordered to follow males' orders. Sammy in the A&P makes very crude, descriptive remarks about the girl's physical appearance. Also, Lingle asks the girls to leave because they are wearing nothing but bikinis and says this is not the beach. Women in the early 1960s were still perceived in the media as homemakers. Women who were single were considered unattractive and spinsters, but in the later 1960s, times changed and women were going out, owning their own businesses, getting into politics, going into college, and getting into the media. Women perceived their past oppressions as a sign of protest for their equal rights. These women defied the ideas of the cult of domesticity. The 3 teenage girls wearing the bikinis signified the freeness of women taking charge of themselves and the counterculture ideas such as an unconventional appearance and an unconventional lifestyle. The historical lens continued. The United States nationalism ramped up due to the Cold War. The American identity was that capitalism is the best economic system in the world and communism was pure evil. The United States went to many lengths to protect the citizens from communism. The propaganda against each country, especially in nuclear weapons, created a looming fear among Americans. The American realized that any time the USSR could strike down with missiles and vice versa. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, believed that communism was the best kind of economic system. The ideals of communism are that is a system in place where the public and people work together and they are given things according to their basic needs. This idea can be shown through the kitchen debates between Vice President Richard Nixon and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev on which economic system was the best. Khrushchev noted that Americans spent a lot of money on luxury items rather than basic needs. Materialistic ideas can be seen when Queenie buys the Kingfish fancy herring snacks. Food is considered a basic need by many, but there's the issue of the fancier foods. Fancier foods such as herrings or steak could not be considered basic by the Soviet Union based on the fact that a lot of people cannot afford them. It'd be considered tasteless in the fact that there are many people who spend outrageous amounts of money on fancy foods while others go hungry. Sammy notes that Queenie comes from a high socioeconomic class because she's buying the herrings, and it can be inferred that she looks down upon the rural A&P. Sammy also imagines a life or a path where he could be living the high socioeconomic lifestyle with the luxury items such as Queenie, her friends. The herrings distinguish the Soviets and other ideals, the herrings distinguish the Soviets' ideals and others of the American culture through materialistic objects, while the herrings are associated as a part of higher class American culture. In the historical lens questions, how does the how does the time period of the story affect the attitudes of Lingle and the other shoppers throughout the store when the girls come in wearing bikinis? Question 2, what is one example of the socioeconomic status portrayed in this story? So to answer this first question, it can be seen that Lingle, the other associate of Sammy's, and Sammy all portray the girls as very further down than they are, and they're very misogynistic in the way that they describe them and talk to them, asking them to leave when they are in fact not doing anything wrong, except just wearing a bikini, which now would be considered okay, but back then it was considered scandalous and promiscuous and a bunch of other things. What is one example? And that one example can be the herrings, which herrings are very, in the higher socioeconomic class, would be considered luxury items because they are more expensive. A lot of fancier people eat them, and they can sometimes have a negative connotation towards them for people such as Sammy wants to be in that higher class.
The reader's response lens. Throughout the story, Updike really uses the subject of teenagers versus adults. The story starts with a teenage boy working a part-time job in a convenience store. The 3 teen girls walk in dressed in bathing suits. Most of the story involves the boy Sammy's interest in the girls. Towards the end, there's a conflict with the manager who came over to shame the girls for their attire, stating that they didn't have anything on and that it was very disrespectful. Sammy does not like the way he spoke to the girls, so he stands up to him. In the end, he quits and slightly regrets his foolish decision. There is a lesson to be learned from Sammy, that with the actions you take, you must first think forward to the consequences of your actions. The reader's response lens continued. Sammy's decision goes to show that he is still immature in many ways. Some because he quits his job on a whim simply because of a group of girls got embarrassed, not thinking of the outcome. Now he has no job and kind of regrets his decision. He goes on to think that he's still ready to go on into life a changed person because he was proud to stand up for himself and someone else. The conflict of teenagers and adults is really seen there as he fights with the manager, because teenagers aren't really listened to by adults in any time frame, in old days and days of now. Sammy's decision is going to change his life by making him more confident, maybe, but not so much more than that, as he really just acted on his emotions and did not think his actions through like a person really should. The reader's response questions: how does what Sammy does reflect on his character? And what does Sammy's decision have on his life? Sammy's character is shown as he wants to be like a hero to the girls, but he doesn't really need to be because they know how to stand up for themselves as they do in the story. And what effect does Sammy's decision have on his life? It really just shows that he's a foolish kid and that he really needs to think before he acts on doing things.
The gender feminist lens. A.M.P. was written during a time when women were fighting for equal rights. This only further enhances the stereotypes of women. Women were seen as lesser and not equal to men. The main character, Sammy, shows us this by saying, "You never know for sure how girls' minds work. Do you really think it's a mind in there or just a little buzz like a bee in a glass jar?" He was saying this whenever he was talking about the three girls entering the store, about how the way they were walking up and down the aisles and just picking out random stuff, and then they would pick it up and put it back, and pick up different stuff and put that back as well. And so Sammy saying this about the three girls walking into the store demonstrates a prime example of the stereotype that women are not as smart as men. Sammy, also being a male, most likely believes that he is smarter than women as well. This is a stereotype against women that undermines them. So, like, Sammy, he wouldn't have just been born with this idea. So, the men in his life as well would probably have passed down the idea that, oh, yes, we're more advanced, more smarter than women. So, it's like a traditional role that's getting passed down, a traditional stereotype that's getting passed down that continues to affect women even today. Gender feminist lens continued. Another way we can look at the story is with the objectification of women in mind. The three girls walk in the store wearing bathing suits, and Sammy and other male workers take notice. In the story, it said about how the worker at the meat counter was looking at the girls, and also the man that Sammy worked with at the cash registers. So the man that he worked with at the cash registers was married, but he also was interested in looking at the girls, interested in staring at their bodies. So Sammy and the others spend a good majority of the time examining and listing details of their bodies. There was 3 different girls, and Sammy broke down the 3 girls into different categories. One, he called one of them fat. He had another one labeled as pretty, but she wouldn't make it because her chin was too long. And then he had another girl that just seemed perfect to him, Queenie. And this following quote is Queenie is the one that he was talking about. She just walked straight on slowly on those long white prima donna legs. Sammy was staring at one of the girl's legs, Queenie, while also naming her the most beautiful lead girl. He also says that the same girl sticks her neck out. The longer her neck was, the more of her there was. Sammy saying this just means the more of her body that he can stare at. So with her neck being long and all of her body exposed due to her wearing the bathing suit, he sees it as sort of a gateway to keep looking at her, to find a bigger excuse to stare at her longer or to look at more of her body. Gender feminist lens continued. Sammy also takes notice of the other girls. So the other girls, as I mentioned before, there was a tall one and another one that he kept referring to chubby or fat. So right before the girls left, they were told they should be covered up by the manager. The manager says that they should have their shoulders covered whenever they walk into the store. And this didn't really sit well with the girls. They were upset that they were told this, and they wanted to like fight back and say, "Oh, we're just coming in quickly," but the manager didn't want to hear any of that. He didn't want them exposed, which is another example of women's bodies causing distractions to men. Like even today, we have a school dress code that can cause distractions apparently. So for example, at school, we're not allowed to have our shoulders out, like as in the story says. So somehow shoulders are causing a giant distraction to the male eyes. And Semi says, and the plump one in plaid that I liked better from the back, a really sweet can. So he was talking about the chubby or fat girl, that she only looked better from the back. And he says this multiple times during the story, that she looks good from the back, how nice her butt is. He even went into descriptions about how her butt was white underneath it, which you would really have to be staring at her body to figure that out. But Sammy says that he likes the way the girl looks from behind better, how nice her butt is. He says this if women are just objects to look at with no other purpose. So him going into details of the women is like him describing a detail of a car or a detail of something else nice and showy that people love to gaze at. It's like the girls aren't really people, they're just objects walking around the store, as if they're merchandise in the store that he can buy or figure out which one he likes the best. And my questions are, would the manager have acted the same if it were boys instead of girls, or still told them to cover up? Boys in swim trunks, no shirt. To me, I think the manager would not have told them to cover up because, you know, it's boys, and like people think it's different somehow if boys are less exposed than girls are more exposed. If, for example, the dress code at school, if we bring up that topic again, it's not really meant for the boys, it's really meant for the girls. Like, who cares if a boy has his shirt off? You know, boys can walk around their house with their shirt off or walk around outside with their shirt off, and no one really says anything. But if a girl was to do that, then everybody would probably be upset, be like, oh, how is she doing that? The children are gonna look, whatever. I think that the manager really just told the girls to cover up because he just didn't want anyone to say anything to him about how the place isn't respectful. Or also he could have told them to cover up because it was causing a distraction to him. Maybe he was distracted by what he saw and needed the girls to leave. My second question is, how is it hypocritical that Sammy asked the question if girls even have a brain, but he could not remember if he scanned items at the checkout while he was staring at the girls' bodies? So when the girls first came in, Sammy was checking out this lady's groceries, and he was holding a box of something, and he says that he couldn't remember if he scanned it or not, so he scanned it again. But it turns out he had already scanned it twice. And the woman was really upset at him that like he needs to pay attention to his job, he needs to figure out what he's doing. So him doing that shows us that his brain has a one-track thing. He can't multitask. He can't even think straight. When these girls come in, once again, he's objectifying their bodies here whenever he's staring at their bodies. But he's like, do girls even have a brain? He said the thing about the bee in the glass jar, like, is their brain just a buzz? Him and other people couldn't figure out how girls' brains work. So it's hypocritical because Sammy was saying all that about the girls, like, are they smart? They're just dumb. It's just a bee. They don't even have a brain. But he couldn't even remember himself if he scanned an item. And apparently men are supposed to be smarter, more superior. So it's very hypocritical that he's saying that the girls are dumb and don't have a brain when he's the one that can't remember if he scanned something.
The psychology lens. In the story, it's told through the eyes of Sammy, the store's cashier. It goes over what he's thinking over everyone else. That day, he questioned whether he should work for someone who respects women so little that it pushed him to quit his job. In his head, he's thinking about his morals and whether they align with what the store owner is saying to these young ladies, even though throughout the entire story he was sexualizing them and continually staring at their bodies while in their bathing suits. He thinks that he needs to stick up for them, which is problematic on its own. This is problematic because he is upset about how the owner is disrespecting these girls, but at the same time doesn't think they can stand up for themselves and need a man to protect them. He takes this role on without them really needing him, and yells at the store owner saying that he's going to quit, and that he quits just to get the attention of these girls, even though they're not paying any mind to him and had already left when he quit his job, which he then later regrets because now he doesn't have a job. And he only wanted to be the hero for these girls because he wanted them to like him. It shows that he still had some bias over women that he still hadn't gotten over. He's still biased in the fact that women couldn't stand up for themselves, and he just continually stared at them and thought that they shouldn't cover up because he enjoyed looking at them. Sammy was shocked by how these girls came in the store. The three of them came in from the beach to get something for the main girl, Queenie's mother, and they just came straight from the beach in their bathing suits, paying no mind to it at all. It was just their casual outfit from the beach. And he wasn't disgusted by them, but he was intrigued about how they were so bold, especially in this time period, to come in the way they were dressed. In this time period, it was already outrageous that girls would be wearing such little to go swimming, and they were bold enough to go out and be seen with barely any clothes on, and they were just so willing to go into the store ran by almost completely men to get just that one can of things. These girls created a questioning in his head whether girls should be able to go out like this or if they should be scolded because they were too exposed. This was a question that had already popped up in his head as why would they come in like this to begin with if they didn't really want to fight? They just expected that they should not be treated poorly by this man, Langle. They didn't think that they needed to be scolded over what they were wearing. They weren't like being provocative in any way. They were just going straight from the beach to the store. Yet they were still scolded anyway because these men were scared that they were going to be staring at these girls and they were going to come get them for staring. My question is, why did Sammy feel that he needed to take the hero role on behalf of these girls? He just thought that they needed a man to stand up for them. They didn't ask him, they didn't go up to him, they didn't feel like they needed him to stand up. He just wanted their attention. He felt that they needed to be paying attention to him since he had been paying so much attention to them that whole time, and he had been staring at them, and they didn't need him. They had already left when he had yelled at the store owner. They were already halfway back to the beach probably by when he was yelling at the store owner trying to get their attention. He just did it for the attention. He wanted them to like him, and he didn't do it to help them. He really did it to help himself get to them. And why did he stay fixated on the girls longer than anyone else? He stayed fixated on them because he was just being a teenage boy. They were not hardly wearing any clothes. They weren't doing anything too provocative, but somehow he just felt that they wanted to be stared at and that they were asking him to stare, when in reality they were just picking up something, and he just stayed fixated on them because he thought that they wanted his attention.
Okay, so in conclusion, from the A&P, we can see how gender affected it. So how we discussed the girls were wearing the bathing suits and how the men were staring at them. We also discussed how economics came up, for example, with the herrings, and we discussed how it was a time where women were just starting to get out and get for their rights. And we also discussed how John Updike really wrote this story because he was just into normal, everyday types of stories.